Hello, and welcome to the planning workshop on fencing. So it is 6 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock, and we are in the basement of the City Hall. And we're going to start the discussion today on fencing. We have one absent commissioner who's gave us notice, and that's Susan. She's not going to be here for our regular meeting. So I'll start with opening the discussion.
Well,
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
Well, I just want to say first and foremost, I'm not comfortable with putting any more restrictions or governmental oversight on property rights outside of the two Victorian districts. If you live outside on one of these county roads and you have some property and you want to stick a fence up in front of it, whatever you want to make of it, as long as it's not out of the guidelines of the fire department or the building inspector, or your neighbors don't call and say it's a public hazard, I just am not comfortable with any additional governmental oversight of property rights in Eureka Springs outside of the historic district. And I just am not comfortable with this whole thing we're trying to do. I don't know what the purpose is. Are we trying to put more restrictions and more rules on private property owners, or what? Because I'm not comfortable with doing that. So I just want to say I am not in support of this proposal. Okay. And that's just my personal view.
Okay. The initial fencing came to us from the code enforcement inspector asking, because we had no fencing restrictions. But I understand, I appreciate your information on that. And anyone else on where we're at? We left off last time. We were looking at the historic requirements document. And so anybody has anything that they might have found on that document?
Not necessarily. I mean, I echo Mike's predisposition to be able to oppose certain things on property rights, and that's why one of the things. But I also understand where this may dovetail into other building code issues, and that's why I think my comments previous workshops were less concerned about putting together a detailed level of restrictions as far as here's the way we want your sign to look. It was more about perhaps having some guidance on what fences, what fences not to have. And so that, for me, I'm just reiterating that. I'm a lot less interested in regulating how people, every nuance of their fence, rather than these are the kind of fences that we simply don't want.
Right. And in the same light Michael was talking about was, I too have a thing about property, liberties, but the reality here is also we're talking about keeping a certain aesthetic quality in a neighborhood to help enhance the property value. So at the same time, without the restrictions, it's very possible that that same individual that's concerned about his liberties also wants to ensure that his property values are kept up, and part of that would be a regulation that the city could enforce to ensure that a unsightly fence wasn't erected on our property.
And I think everybody feels a certain way about not wanting to regulate their property rights until it happens to you next door,
right?
And then all of a sudden becomes, well, maybe I don't want to regulate anybody's property rights except for that guy, right? So I think we just have to make sure that that's for me where I think we just and if we don't want to go down this direction anymore, we just decide this is not the time. We don't want to do it. Then that's a different matter. If there's not a consensus to proceed here, then I certainly wouldn't stand in the way of that. But I'm more about what do we want to avoid.
Okay. Well, the one thing that like I said, the code. Paul brought it to us because it was hindering his ability to respond to complaints. There wasn't any for him to dig into. So I believe that, and I still believe that we need an ordinance providing instruction or some kind of direction for our code guy to ensure that the compliance. And aesthetics, as well as we've already got a historic requirement. So at the last workshop, we talked about bringing in those guidelines and creating our our ordinance using that as a baseline.
Could I get some clarification
Go
here?
ahead.
Are we talking about R1, R2, or the whole?
Well, it would be the residential zones. It would be residential.
R1 and R2.
Right, because the commercial zones have got a completely different set of requirements.
Well, my feeling on this is that I think for R1, we definitely have to look into the historic aesthetics.
Right.
Because that's what we're on the National Registry. As far as R2, I think, people should have the freedom to put up whatever fence they, as long as it's not a nuisance to.
Well, that's
the neighborhood.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Just to clarify, though,
Go ahead, Michael.
the R1 has specific guidelines for fencing within the Historic District Commission. They regulate that, and that's within their own entity of that group. But we're talking about, say, down out behind Lake Lucerne, that neighborhood out there, somewhere like that, that's away from the city or something.
So that's in what, the agricultural?
Well, no, that's still residential out there. I mean, if you got up there on Brown Lewis, any county road, if you go on a county road that's still within the city limits, that's who we would affect. We would be telling them what kind of fence they can have.
Then I think that what we should just
Because
look
if you do,
at.
it's going to be outside of this. If anything residential is going to be everybody that has a house. And then
Right.
if we change it to do commercial, that's different. But if you do a residential restriction, it's going to affect you if you live, over off Main Street 2 blocks, or if you live on County Road 309. And I just don't want to be telling the people out at Lake Lucerne that their property out there that they have to do a fence that I like.
Right, I got you. No. Yeah, go ahead, Cassie.
Couple of things. Number one, the historic district is quite large. There is R2 zone and I believe also R3 zone that is in the boundaries of the historic district. So they would still fall under the historic district fence guidelines. That being said, there are also, just because it's a house doesn't automatically mean it's zoned residential. We have lots of residences that are in both agriculture and commercially zoned areas. So that's something to take into consideration. You can narrow a fence ordinance to be just for residential zones, and that would be different than saying, and probably clearer than saying it's for residences. But if you say just residential zones, you will miss some residences because they fall into a different zone.
Right,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay. So, Ann, anything? Yeah, you've been quiet.
I think that if we mirrored what HTC does, but maybe give them options, I don't think in my area a chain link fence would be approved in the front yard, but it could be approved in a different area. I'm certainly not for blocking off your entire house into a compound. I'm not in favor of a wooden privacy fence in the front yard, but I am open to decorative chain link. There's a lot of different types of fences that can be done. How you determine who does what, I don't know.
Okay.
Isn't there
Michael?
I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it, my own negligence. Isn't there, Paul came in and told us once that there is right now a restriction as to how high a security fence can be, or 8 foot or 6 foot?
Well, again, that's historic guidelines.
Say again?
There's only historic guidelines.
Okay, but I mean.
So,
I believe I believe what Paul might have been referring to was if it's over, I don't know if it's over 6 feet or over 7 feet, then it requires a building permit. But
Okay.
as of right now, anything under 7 feet for sure, doesn't have to go to building at all.
And that's my point. I mean, it's up to, say, 7 foot. I mean, personally, if you live on it somewhere and you are outside of the historic district and you want to put a 7-foot fence around your entire property, go for it. That's your deal. I mean, who am I to tell you you can't?
Well, that's the crux of the issue, right there. I mean, that's.
I mean, if we pick and choose about, okay, this neighborhood can have
That's
chain link
exactly-
fence, this neighborhood it can only have a 5-foot wooden fence. You guys can do what you want. I'll listen to you and then I'll vote accordingly if it ever comes up. I'm just telling you that I'm not in support of government telling people what they can do on their private property unless it's a fire hazard or a safety hazard.
Well, but I don't think there's anybody on this council more protective and interested in maintaining people's rights and property rights than me. But the purpose of the Planning Commission is basically to create, modify, and give guidance on the enforcement of regulations by nature of what we're doing. So there are going to be regulations of private property in a community that you want to try to protect and maintain and grow. And so it's not uncommon. What we're talking about here is not uncommon, even in cities that are not predisposed to governing people's rights at all. Even the city of, let's just say, Rogers down the road. It's pretty conservative area, and they still have a basic fence guideline. And that was my view, is that I would just, my view was, could we just start with keeping it simple? We also have to remember that whatever we kind of put forward here in recommendation or an ordinance has to get to city council. Yeah. And city council is going to have a whole nother level of pushback, right? And so that's why I'm saying, in my opinion, just keep it initially as minimal as possible. Key thing, what's the height? What type of materials that we do not want? And then distinguish between residential and commercial. Try to keep it simple.
But even whatever ordinance is passed, the most restrictive ordinance overrules everything else. Isn't that true? So if you make something 4 foot high, and then you had to put every people 5 foot high, that most restrictive 4 foot is going to be the baseline.
So can I throw out a hypothetical here? So what if a developer comes in and decides to put in a gated community and, like big brick wall around a compound?
That's why we're here talking about it.
It's their property.
There are properties with brick walls around them right now. They're outside the historic district. There's one right in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
There is? Okay, I did not know.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a masonry wall with brick that was stuccoed. Yeah. It actually looks great.
Have we looked at Rogers' fence? Have we looked at what Rogers is doing?
I think we did. I think there was an example.
Right.
And it's pretty basic, actually.
It is.
I mean, why reinvent the wheel? Maybe we could just pull from that.
I didn't hear. Why wouldn't we just pull from that?
Yeah, why see what they have? It may be just exactly what we need.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that, Michael, give it a little bit, devil's advocate a little bit. What if a neighbor wanted to put up barbed wire with razor wire? I mean, would you want that in your neighborhood?
I wouldn't want it at all, but if they wanted it and it's not illegal, who am I to tell them they can't?
Yeah, but I would consider that a nuisance.
Right, public safety, things like that.
We're a governmental entity here for this people of the city, and I just don't want to discriminate somebody because if you live out over in County Road 309 within the city limits, and you want to put razor wire, as long as it's not a safety hazard as far as this book or fire hazard, go for it. None of my business. That's just, like I say, it's just a personal preference.
Yeah.
I just don't like this right now for a town. Yeah. For a town our size, we got a lot of rules.
Oh, I understand.
I just don't see the need to put any more on them unless it's, and then even one more thing. We asked Paul, does he get any complaints, calls about?
Well, I think that's what
he said. He not really any of them.
Yeah, that's why he came to us, is because he did. But he had no way of doing anything. He didn't have any ordinances.
But he said he didn't even get any calls for it.
Well, I think the dynamic was he was saying all we got is the guidelines, but everything else is an ordinance. And this was a hole he saw.
Sure.
So he came to us,
I don't want to just be the person that's causing disruptions, but I just let you know how I feel about it.
No, I got you.
And there's not really, as far as the way somebody wants to put their property out on County Road 309, here, because if I pass it for the city, I'm going to be passing it for them too. And I just not comfortable telling you how you can put a fence around your yard. You can put a pink 6 foot high, I don't know, plastic fence, as long as it's not, a hazard or.
Well, that's what we're saying. I think the historic guidelines, which are already there, doesn't allow.
Yeah, but I'm just one vote. I'm just one opinion. You guys can do whatever you want. I just want to tell you right now. That unless you can give me something concrete, I'm really opposed to telling people what they can do with their property. Right. Anyway.
Okay. But go ahead, Tom.
One indirect benefit would be, I believe it says on the front yard, it has to be, 3 feet from the right-of-way, the city right-of-way.
Right, setbacks.
And people now are building fences right up against, in some areas, against the asphalt pavement. An indirect benefit will be if we keep pushing the sidewalk, improving the sidewalks we have now and putting additional sidewalks in, this will give you a 3-foot buffer there. So if we ever do get a push for improving additional sidewalks, you won't have a fence right up against the city street where there's no room for a sidewalk. And then you're telling people, well, we won't put sidewalks in, but you've got a fence there, so you've got to move your fence so we can put a sidewalk in. So I think this will be an indirect benefit if we keep the fences 3 foot off of the street right away, that we've got room to put additional sidewalks in as the city, gets to that point when they want to really do that.
Okay, that works. That makes a lot of sense. Also, trolleys. We've got trolleys, and those trolleys, when they make wide turns, and it could impact. If that wasn't abated a little bit back, they could impact the fence. So they could.
The typical person may not even know where their right-of-way is, which brings up another unintended consequence, if that's the right term, is that you start putting stakes in the ground. If something does require a permit, which I'm really opposed to, so long as it's within a certain basic standard, there's not a permit required. But what if you don't get a permit and you start digging holes and you didn't call out the utility people, they didn't mark the lines, and boom, next thing you know, and there's some fences even on my street that look pretty darn close to the water lines. You know what I mean? So, and I guarantee you, they did not have a survey and lay that out and stake it out. They just told the contractor, run that fence line about right here.
So looking at what Tom was saying, that a fence ordinance would not only protect the city, but also help the property owner so he wouldn't have to move his fence again. So it would, in a way, if that rule was in place, then he would be good in case there was a sidewalk work or anything else, or if the city had to come up, because under that sidewalk, I guess 9 times out of 10 is usually the plumbing for the city, the water lines under there. So, because I think right now they've had to tear up some stuff downtown. They've got a water break, but that's what happens. I mean, but if you put a fence up, like a 7 or a huge wall, then that'd be a lot of expense for that poor property owner to have to rebuild that, right? So in a way, it protects the property owner by having a regulation that prohibits him from costing himself more money. So I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I mean, it would be, so I think at the same time, we're a historic area where people come here for the aesthetics, they come here for the ambiance, they come here for the old veneers, they come, and so part of that is that we've got to remember that, and we need to protect that, because I think one of the things that a property owner, if he's historic, if he violates that historic commission guidelines, he no longer is contributing building, can't get grants for improvement of his property, so he's causing himself harm. So I think an ordinance in some cases protects property values and property owners, and so that's what I'm advocating for. I think we need to have ordinances, not so much for the sake of ordinances, but for the sake of the future of the city, but also protect the individuals, like I said, we saw rights, but at the same time protecting the rights, but ensuring that we protect their future investment, that property. So by having those ordinances or having a rule, we definitely outline that this is, and of course, like you said, we've got to get the city council. All we're doing is putting something down on paper and submitting to them, and then of course we'll do a workshop when we get to if we get to a point where we have a ordinance that we want to present to them. We'll have a workshop so we don't have to go back and forth. But part of that would be to work out details ahead of time. But I really think that the historic guidelines, a lot of them, they've done that. I mean, they use the historic of 100 years the town's been existing. So those reasons for those rules were based on history, not just a flimsy case because people want pink walls today, or but they literally did it because that's how the town started and that's what it looked like, and so that's why they want to keep it that way. So, in a way, people moved to Eureka because of that, and I think we need to look at protecting that as part of the ordinance, protecting the ambiance and the reason why people, because without, I mean, everybody in this room would, I think, would agree with me, but without the tourists, we are dead as a town.
So, Ferg, what do you suggest how we move forward on this?
Well, I think while we move forward, I really would like to see if anybody doesn't have any issues with it, that we ask Cassie to rewrite the rules document, and also maybe some of Rogers, we might look at if there's some things in Rogers that you think, Cassie, you think would be good to put in there, let's go ahead and put them in there. Let's get a draft ordinance written up by Cassie, and then at our next workshop, we come together as a group and we look at it. And we do those things that we're looking at, the protection of property rights, as well as the protection of the city of Eureka Springs. So that's really, I think, our underlying rule, our guidance here as commissioners, is we're here to ensure that the voice of the people as well as is heard, as well as we protect the city itself from its own self sometimes. So anybody, does that sound good to everybody?
The only thing I would add is that before we actually make any kind of official move, that we actually invite this public
Sure.
give an input on it and see how they feel about it.
Okay, so that's what, so we can have that written up, a draft, and then, well, our next workshop, we'll put a notice out to the public and ask people like Main Street USA to come in, some of the organizations and stuff that are very philanthropic, as well as they're aware of the community's needs and stuff, and they can give us some feedback on it. Mm-hmm. And then if we all agree at that time, then we'll vote on it and see if at the next meeting after next time we will have the council come in and review it, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay.
Yeah, I think we need a part of this is that the historic district in downtown is the asset, right for Eureka, right. And because they do a good job of policing themselves, and maybe those that have properties right there think that they see a lot of holes in it all the time, right? They see things that could be better, I know. But generally speaking, they've done a good job of policing those. And there's some pretty strict, ordinances in that, and there should be, because that's the key asset for the whole town. And all I'm saying is that I think over time we need to broaden that out a little bit for growth. Particularly to continue to attract people to buy houses here that may not be in the historic district, or build houses here that may not be in the historic district, to keep the population base up and maybe even growing a bit, but certainly the values to grow. Otherwise, they're just going to all move out to the lake. And by the way, there's many subdivisions out by the lake who have some pretty strict ordinances, on what you can build and what fences you can put up and so forth. So that's all I'm saying. So for me, it's just kind of the aesthetic value creation. And the second reason is that even though there may be, we'll just use fences as an example, that don't meet those codes, I'm not in favor of, obviously, in any way, putting those people under any kind of enforcement whatsoever. But when they replace those fences, or they're damaged, or if it's a new owner, now there's a basic standard.
Absolutely.
Which enhances the whole neighborhood.
Right. Mm-hmm. Can I just say that I don't want us to become a homeowners association for the whole city.
Say it again?
Are you familiar with homeowner associations in the city urban areas, where a homeowner association sets the guidelines for the entire home development? I don't want us to become some kind of a homeowners association for the entire city of Eureka Springs, and dictating whether they can have a swimming pool in their yard, or whether they can, just like I say, when we're talking about the aesthetics of the city, and I agree 100%, the fact that the city area in downtown has a unique thing that draws the tourists in, but the folks living out there at Lake Lucerne, or somebody living on County Road, they're still our citizens, and they have just as much right to how they live their life on their property as the person living next door to me, which I really won't like if he puts a pink fence up. But if we tell him he can't, then we're just telling the people out on Road 309 they can't either.
I got you.
Because the regulation would be any residential district, and if you're a house, I would understand that would be, And I've driven down these country roads, and there's some people with some real low incomes. If we're going to tell those people that they have to tear their fence out because it's not acceptable to our guidelines, I'm just saying, I really just want to be careful. I know you guys are sincere. I know everybody here is concerned with the city of Eureka and everybody involved with it. I just don't want to add any burdens to people that really can't afford to do anything to the property that they can't afford. I mean, you know, people we live around here, they're higher income, they take care of it. My neighbor's not going to put up some crazy weird fence, but some old boy out here that's got a halfway wrecking yard on his property, if he wants a big old chain link fence or whatever, then fine, go for it. Like I say, I just want to make sure we're not trying to,
Okay,
you know, bully people into putting in what we feel is
okay.
good. So that's all.
Well, I certainly wouldn't be in favor of any kind of fines or retroactive requirements. Personally, I mean, I would absolutely not be in favor of that.
And
I mean, I'm interpreting this that it's our residential areas in town. I think that with any ordinance that we have, you always have the ability to come in for a variance.
right,
And depending on where your property is, I mean, if this was in R2, but you're way away from everybody, you've got a mini farm, that's a whole different situation than being in the middle of a neighborhood.
right, right. And also, there's something else too. We got subdivisions that have rules when they're created. But, you know, that hasn't been, you know, I mean, that's one thing. I love to get a listing of what some of those subdivision rules are, because it would be nice to know as we do that. But at the same time, it's difficult. I think the state actually would talked about that in a recent act they did, but I don't know if the city, I don't know, Cassie, do you know if the city uses subdivision rules as a baseline for anything?
I don't know.
Yes, yeah, I was wondering, because I know that my subdivision has them, and there's something like you can't do certain things. You know, can't put an RV, or you can't, have a cement pad that an RV would park in my subdivision. That's the Pines subdivision, but I'm sure that I would love to see if we could find out what those are. Yeah, go ahead.
Several years ago, somebody here wanted to do a tourist lot, B&B, in a subdivision that prohibited that in that subdivision. We turned it down. It went to city council. The mayor got an opinion of municipal league saying that the city council, they voted for it, by the way, don't let the B&B go in, said the municipal league said the city council could override a property owners association.
Okay.
And so, the city can, do things that I wouldn't believe that,
Yeah, same here.
They did.
Yeah, but again, that's why sometimes maybe some ordinances can actually protect property values, even though, the main thought pattern would be that ordinances are bad, but maybe they're not. Maybe there are kinds where it protects actually the property owner, and he gets to, his value isn't lost because a neighbor's putting up razor wire across the street, right? I know that's an extreme, that wouldn't happen, but I'm just saying that. So going forward, the next workshop, if Cassie could present that as a draft ordinance using the historic guidelines and anything else in Roger's ordinance that would look pertinent, and then we can discuss that at our next workshop. Does everybody agree with that? Anybody against? Okay. So I think that's it. I think we're done with our workshop. Unless anybody has anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending, and our meeting will start at 6 o'clock. All right. So get a break. Take a break, everybody. Thank you for attending.